Yep.
Daniel Umick, Director of Operations at Alpha and Omega Computer Consultants out of the greater Nashville, Tennessee area. We definitely deal with a lot of incident response scenarios.
All right. Sorry, I'm trying trying to manage these different windows here on my laptop. I'm on vacation, guys, and I'm doing a webinar from a countertop here. So, uh, yeah. So I guess let's start off with what is an incident response plan? So you're on a checklist, which I mean, I guess is a good start, or PDF just sitting somewhere on your server. How do you guys define incident response plans to your clients and kind of, I guess, get them into it, get them buying into it, and then start working on it? Anybody want to go first?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Obviously, we kind of loosely define ours as the fire drill you hope you have to never use, but you hope you have it when you need it. So it's a living, breathing document that should help you walk through the steps that you need to act on, given the worst happens. And obviously, we pray every day that the worst doesn't happen. So, um, common pain point for SMBs too. Uh, I think the misconception is that large enterprises are more need to be more compliant and have a greater need for this type of plan. But I think when stuff hits the wall, every business needs to have an incident response plan in place.
I typically use I like the fire drill. It's your evacuation plan. And also, when talking to companies is when you're under high levels of stress, it's nice to have something already wrote down so you can refer back to it. So you're not having to rely solely on your memory that's already all planned out and who needs to be activated, what needs to happen, what's the order of operations. That way you can just kind of go easier into a flow state. It's already predefined. Um, it's in and of itself, it's kind of an insurance plan.
Yeah, I like to think of it like, more than just a document. I try to, talk about it in those terms with the client is, it's not just something that you fill out and file away and then pull out every once in a while and just kind of go over it. It's really the tools, the processes, the chain of command and escalation for when that threat arrives that like all those things are kind of set up, ready to go. The wheels can be put in motion at any point in time, but the document, needs to kind of just outline exactly how that works.
Yeah. So do you guys, well, I assume you guys all have an incident response plan. Do you have a kind of a standard one that you go on your clients with, or?
So I have a templatized kind of version that I can, sit down with clients with and be like, okay, this, we just need to fill out this basic information. I kind of created it to be a bit more modular. And then I have one that's specific to our organization internally. What happens in the event of a breach for, more power? God forbid that ever happens. But um, this way, it's having somebody start a incident response plan from scratch when they really don't necessarily know what goes into it is very daunting for a lot of people. So having something I can just kind of show them like, okay, we just need to fill out these sections and we can move on from there.
Yeah, I want to go back to just a point I said earlier too, is that I agree that it's this template, right? You got to start somewhere, but that thing takes on life quick on its own. Once you get that door cracked on what are the things that we need to be talking about, I think that's where the creative process and the experience really kicks in from a good partner and helps walk you down. What do we really need to be talking about too, in addition to just the stuff that's on a particular template.
And as far as like our standard for incident response, there's really two different ways that looks. One is what we do internally and what we will do for the clients who don't have a cyber insurance policy in place versus the clients who do have cyber insurance. That process of getting a claim filed, when it's been discovered and there's already damage and there's potential downside. Um, it's, how soon are we notified and what is the state of things when we're notified? And B is, has the claim been filed? Has the claim been approved before we can go in and do what we need to do? Now, in an internal, sense, we have our own insurance policy to worry about, and we have our own processes and controls in place. But with the clients who do have a policy, it really kind of just it depends on how that policy is underwritten as to whether we can go in and start up right away, or if we have to kind of do what we can do in the interim until that claim would be approved, and then we'd be able to kind of do everything we need to do to address it.
Cool. And then, so how often do you guys update your clients' IRPs?
At
We
least once a
actually,
year.
yeah,
Yeah, I'd say about annually.
I think unless there's a major change or shift or strategy that needs to be brought up, yeah,
Or a
dusting it
new
off once a year is a great idea.
or a new tool's implemented, if all of a sudden, hey, client has a seam that's been implemented, that's going to change a whole lot of, where we go to look for information stuff. So
All right, let's jump into today's cybersecurity landscape. So we've seen obviously a big shift with AI and everything. What's the hardest hitting stuff you guys are seeing right now?
more than any, I mean, it's a ton of phishing attacks, stuff like that. But the speed of which it's coming these days is it's incessant. Um, if I don't, I mean, I'll probably get 3, 4 alerts in a day for somebody clicked on a bad link, somebody, piped in their Microsoft credentials into something that they shouldn't have. Um, that's the biggest one that we're seeing, and it's consuming just a sheer volume of time.
Yeah, I agree. The AI landscape and just the increase in bad actors out there is just antivirus nowadays just doesn't keep up with how fast it's evolving. And like we all know, we used to be able to easily pick out those emails and things just because of the bad English. Well, gosh, you just copy and paste stuff into chat, and guess what? You got perfect English, and our easiest go-to now is gone. So, and also too, I think that something that gets missed off of the incident response plans as well. Obviously, this is very IT centric, but some people, just from a general loss of power or weather event or things related outside IT, having that incident response plan that encompasses not only the IT threat but also the we had a derecho event, which I'd never been a part of too, which took out a lot of our operational components, including our IT staff for a little while, a few years back. So taking things into account, in that when we're talking about a growing landscape, it seems like the weather nowadays is less predictable. So things like that need to land in your plan as well.
Yeah, I think the biggest change to the modern landscape is, attacks are no longer really focused highly on getting into the local network at a company. I mean, there definitely those things still happen, and people are still trying to attack on those vectors and get the low-hanging fruit that they can. But the more sophisticated hackers, the better, hackers are now going, and they're going after resources in the cloud based around identity, right? If they can get your email, they can get into an account and get into your cloud environment. There's more resources stored there now anyways. Not too many people have a bunch of file servers and things on site at locations. I mean, there are industries that do, but a lot of people are going to be in Dropbox or Gmail or 365 SharePoint. And so they're trying to penetrate into those environments. Even Teams, can be a really, really good place for a hacker to be able to, nestle in and sit there and just kind of watch conversations and gather tons and tons of data without people even knowing that they're there. And I think that's a big misconception about the modern, threats is that people are told, hey, I do business with this, huge tech company. Of course, they have security in their data centers and their servers, but they're not the problem. You, the user who types in your, phishing email credentials, and you, the user who is being attacked in these other kind of more sophisticated behavior-based, social engineering-based ways, is actually opening up that environment, regardless of all those security controls that are in place. And I think that's, takes a mindset shift for people to really understand how these things are happening and how much more important it is to protect the cloud outside of, the controls that are already, on that platform.
A prime example of that is, we'll take a O365, for example, with enterprise app registrations. One misconfiguration, or, say a client wants to be allowed to, hey, we want to be able to register apps as we want. Okay, well, misclick, all of a sudden perfect data is now registered in enterprise app, registration. Can literally just parse everybody's mailboxes, get access to all your contacts, and then go ahead and just send out as you, and then just propagate that chain right on down. And it takes seconds for that to take effect. And that's where you see a lot of the AI coming through, is it can now execute tons of actions rapidly, much more fast, much more fast than it used to be.
Yeah, I mean, it's I mean, I always like to talk to like business owners about like what their sales teams are doing, what their marketing teams are doing, because when you start messing around with marketing tools, you start realizing how easy it is for hackers to use these tools. I'm sure, I don't know if you ever heard of the tool Clay,
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
where I mean, dude, that thing is so powerful. And you just think about a hacker using that to like pull social media information, pull news information, pull everything they can about you, and then customize those emails to line up with you, line up with your doing. Hey, line up with, hey, you guys are hosting a webinar today, and I'm going to email email you about it. Um, it's you're like, it's just amazing how more people aren't falling for it. I mean, knock on wood. Um, but I always like to kind of point out, like when you're talking about the marketing tools, like just think of the bad guys using tools like this. Except for they probably don't have any restrictions.
That, marketing tools, distribution lists, seeing people get part of those and email back in. Now I've got 300 copies of the same freaking email.
Yeah, yeah. I always love when people respond back to this. Take me off the list. It's just like, anyways, uh, yeah. I'm trying to think. I mean, we were talking before this opened about the whole fake resumes and jobs.
Yeah.
Did we talk about that on on the webinar? Sorry, I'm losing track as I'm trying to get this
No,
to work.
No,
that was before we went on the air. Yeah.
what we were talking about prior to us coming on to air is one of the attack vectors that's being common now is HR posts a job application, gets in, hundreds of resumes for this one. Well, threat actors are starting to embed, malicious code into those PDFs. So you click on it, or, you'll click on it and say, oh, you need to, sign into SharePoint to access this resume. And they're not going to think about it. They're just trying to get their job done, and they're going to pipe the credentials in, and there you go. Now your credentials have been harvested. They might even prompt for an MFA token, put that in. Well, now your token's stolen.
Yeah, there's
Yep.
what, like 16 billion passwords just
19 billion just dropped
yeah.
this last weekend.
So if you're not changing your passwords, chances are it's in there.
Yeah. That was a research firm that got hit. So it's got stuff from Google, it's got stuff from Facebook, all kinds of metadata. So,
My dog's name is out there, huh?
oh, yeah.
I think you kind of touched on a good point, like inadvertently, and we kind of mentioned this a little bit in the beginning, is that like incident response is not a fixed thing. These new attack vectors, new situations are arising every day, every week. And if you're not evaluating it as a part of your business strategy of, even doing quarterly cybersecurity check-ins and saying, what are we doing? What's working? What's not working? No, actually knowing about the incidents that are taking place in your organization and then making the necessary changes to prevent an incident in the first place, and then, kind of figure out where the gaps are in your current response plan. I think you're doing yourself a disservice, because the amount of time and money that is lost in not being proactive is mind blowing. I've seen it happen to businesses. We all read about it in the news, but what happens in real life, it's scary stuff for sure.
Absolutely. We had so a small story on our side too. So we have an accounting firm that got breached. Their downtime should have been minimal. The problem is that they spent 4 days trying to figure out what to do. And time is money. That's billable hours for 4 days times 10 employees. That's a good chunk of cash out the window. So these things are real, right? I mean, you get caught off guard, you're backpedaling the whole time, and think maybe Josh said it too, while you're fighting the fires, you know, you just don't have the go-to to react properly.
The other is, one of the things too is have a printed copy. If your systems are compromised, you need to have at least the piece of paper, because you may not be able to access the digital copy of your incident response plan. And the other key thing is when you're going through updating your response plan, if you drilled it, have you tested it? Do you know if this is actually going to work in that moment? If you're not drilling it, not testing it, then it's just a stack of papers at that point.
Yeah. I guess, as far as threats, I think, we're kind of talking about the bad guys breaking in type of threats, but then you also have threats of, if you're a healthcare provider and one of your employees' laptop's not encrypted and they lose their laptop and now you got healthcare information on it, like that's an incident. How are you addressing that in your incident response plan as well? We do a lot of CMMC, CUI. That's actually our next tabletop exercise is someone sent a CUI, which we don't want CUI, but somebody sends it to us. What's our plan? How do we handle that incident? So, um, they're not all movie style acts. Anything else on the threat landscape? Let me share my screen again, or share the slides again. Trying to take the slides down so we're not just staring at slides the whole time.
So we can, look at you.
Yeah. All right. Threat landscape. All right. Why planning pays off. I think you guys were kind of getting this a little bit, but seems like a lot of companies, hopefully they do an IRP, but if they do, a lot of companies just do it and they're like, okay, let's move on now. Let's go do something else. And they don't, they don't continue to plan. Like I said, don't continue to practice. So what would you guys say? I think you guys were talking about lost money. What would you say the ROI is as far as preparing, planning?
I think it really just depends on, the size of the organization and, how much risk they actually have. And a lot of times, if you're running a big enough company, if you're doing like $10 million in revenue or more per year, you're really going to hire a third party to come in and assess that risk and kind of try and figure out, okay, how much, are we actually standing to lose here? And then you can kind of hedge against that. So that, it's definitely sort of a combination of, like Tony was saying, those billable hours, but there's also an opportunity cost there. If you have sales employees that can't go out and work and they're able to average 2 or 3 or 4 closes a week, it's not just the billable hours that you're worried about. You're worried about, the opportunity cost of being able to do business and grow business. But, another intangible is just, having the peace of mind. It makes your organization function smoother. If you know what to do in a real emergency, you're not going to panic every time a potential emergency arises. And that's one thing I see in a very smaller organizations or less, developed organizations is that like everything is an emergency and everything is a fire. And, they're not really able to distinguish and they don't know what they would do, if there is a situation. And so we kind of take them from that place to, hey, if something really goes wrong, A, we're going to know about it. B, we're already on top of it. And C, you know what you need to do so that we can do what we need to do. And we'll do it. And that amount of peace of mind and it just kind of resets their focus on just doing business. And that's why they hire companies like us, so they can do what they do and not worry about this stuff.
I agree wholeheartedly with Daniel on that one. The other is, expand out the scope. Places like, healthcare entities, some of them can't take clients while they're down. So the faster, the planning and the preparation allows for faster recovery. And so they can get back to treating patients or, providing critical services. It's not just mom and pop shops where, in that case, we're just talking wages. In this case, we're talking, people's health, emergency services. What happens when a 911 agency gets hit and they can't take calls? It's systems like that, always having things planned in place, ready to go, and hope that you never have to use them.
And going back to the story that I provided too, so just doing some rough math, and I'm probably light on exactly what they're charging per hour, but if they had an incident response plan, let's just say that they were able to resolve their issue in day 1 versus day 6, that's a difference of being down for 10K a day versus 50K for the week. So that's real cash that they couldn't produce, and that could be played in legal space, that can be paid in the financial space, or architecture and engineering, where you have resources that you charge by the billable hour. It's real money gone.
Yeah, I think too, just planning and going back to the tabletop exercises, it might bubble up some gaps that need to be addressed. You sit down with an executive team, start walking through a tabletop, and they're like, "Well, how would that happen?" Well, here's how it would happen, and it's just like, "Well, what can we put in to stop that from happening?" Um, that also kind of helps the planning process, thinking about what gaps you have and how you can mitigate them, or maybe transfer them with cyber insurance or something like that, which is probably something else that should go into your planning.
It's the whole adage, slow is smooth, smooth is fast, but you still have to make sure it's actually smooth.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of tabletop exercises in general, not just for security. Like I'm an ops guy, so like everything in my organization, I'm finding that if I make time to actually walk through the situation with the people involved, I can almost always find a better way to do it, and they can almost always find a better way to do it. It's just if we don't make the time to do that, it's never going to happen. So, I mean, you could really get a lot out of just doing that in general in any business.
Yeah, I went to a business continuity training like years ago from I think it's Disaster Recovery Institute, and they had us do an exercise of like they just went basically said, went to the first person, said 1, 2, 3, and then just like you had to start over, kind of keep going until everybody was done with their number. And there was just like, all right, get with your groups. And it was just like total chaos trying to find who the other ones were and who the other twos were. And then the next time, they did it and they said, okay, one's in the upper right hand, in the front corner to the left, and just that little bit of difference in the timing of it, like was drastically like, cut the time in half or more than half to kind of get organized, versus just like winging it. It was like a good
Yeah.
example of like having a small plan and really speed up the response.
You're teeing up next slide. Well,
All right. It sounds
can't
like
wait to jump
Tony's ready
in.
to go. Let me share my
Don't steal all
screen
my
again.
thunder, man. Not right yet.
All right, let me share my screen here for Tony. Kicks me off the call here. All right. Key parts of the real IR of a real IR plan. Um, Tony, I'm not even gonna say anything. I'm just gonna let you.
Man, you just said none less is the who, what, when, and how. What group do you go to? Where's everybody going? What was the story that you're supposed to repeat? What are you supposed to do? Yeah, that was when we were talking about like NIST and NIST life cycle and the stages and stuff like that too. Just that first one, that preparation, just training, testing, defining exactly. I had it written down, defining on who's doing what. Um, yeah, you couldn't have said it any better with that little exercise that you were talking about, because it is, I mean, you put that in the real world situation where there's actual pressures and a little bit of panic in the air. It takes, is a fun exercise and makes it real.
Yeah, and even defining, your CSIRT team, your cybersecurity incident response team, who's maintaining what role. One of the key things that's overlooked is who's handling the communication back and forth between the teams as well as the client. Defining stuff like that, because there's going to be a lot of information that flows in very, very rapidly. And making sure that you have designated roles, who's doing what, so that you don't have people stepping on each other's toes. It's a good incident response plan, good CSIRT team. It should be more of a dance than you know anything else. It should flow smoothly. Um, and that's what I kind of go back to, because you can get inundated with so many things, and you're looking into so many different categories and areas, figuring out during the assessment you need to make sure that roles are defined.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think, of the things that are most overlooked generally, communication is the absolute top thing. Who's saying what to who? I would say right coming in underneath that is contingency, right? Because things don't always go to plan. Like you have the plan. What if you didn't anticipate something? So like in this, you kind of have the logical steps of how you would, make your plan, which is to identify, protect, detect, respond, to the threat. Well, if you're not, identifying, protecting gets a lot harder. So like if you're not able to identify, there's certain things you're not protecting against, and then you skip to step three. So if you're starting on step three and you're in detect mode and you just detected it, what do you do if you start at step three instead of step one? Right. And have you thought about that? If you think of like just general security principles, even in the physical world of security, like a military base, right? There's like an outer perimeter and an inner perimeter, right? And in that space, it gives you time to think and respond. If the outer perimeter fails, what do we do when we're in the inner perimeter scenario? And so a lot of times, I think it's like don't just go through the paces from top to bottom. Say, okay, now let's try it this way, and we're at step three. We found something. Someone's in an environment. They kind of bypassed our initial defenses and protection. What do we do if they're in here? How do we walk back? Someone's got to figure out how they got in. Someone else has to be responsible for what to do now that they're in there and kind of securing what we can. So I think those two things are often like really, really overlooked because we just kind of want to do these things in a very legislative way. It's like we wrote it down, everyone knows it, we went through it one time, it's good. But that really doesn't prepare you. That's kind of like against the principle of preparedness, which is the whole point of it.
The other thing, you know, pairing like, PySerl or, prep, identification, containment, and eradication, recovery, more or less kind of what is going on, but also an OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, act. So as things are going, always keep in mind, your OODA loop.
Yeah. What do you guys have as far as I guess maybe thinking about your own IRP planner with your clients? What are some of the roles, responsibilities that you guys typically make sure you incorporate? Anything in
Definitely.
particular?
Obviously there's an owner role, who's going to take, what happens, in a given situation, who's going to take that, then who's going to communicate it. So honestly, just getting the owner in there sometimes is, I mean, I don't want to say it's step one, but it's sometimes the hardest step is because you can't have two people on it or three people or 10 people. It has to be one person that's on the owner room. Because yeah, once it jumps in, everybody makes some assumptions and then nobody's doing it when multiple owners. So, the
So
roles can vary too, depending on the task as well. But my overall guidance is just making sure you get one person assigned to each one of those roles as they're created.
In our organization, it kind of really breaks down to like three or four areas. So there's the main point of communication, kind of like what Tony's saying, the owner who's kind of responsible, at least to the client, to coordinate, what they're hearing and how we're kind of communicating that. And then there's sort of an analyst and engineer. Sometimes that's the same person, sometimes that's two different people. The analyst is kind of figuring out everything that's actually happening and what the implications are. The engineer is actually addressing that and going and locking down everything that needs to be locked down, kind of checking all the boxes on the plan. And then there's the coordinator kind of piece. And, that's often the role that I'm in, where I'm taking all that new information, I'm anticipating next steps, and then I'm working with that person who's communicating to make sure that the messaging is clear, and that next steps are clear on both sides.
yeah, for us, we have an ISO or information security officer. That's who's in charge during the incident. Like I'm the CISO for our company, but I may not always be the one that's in incident command. I may be just part of the CSIRT team as one of the responders or an analyst. It could very well be one of my employees, Andrew. He's uh, security analyst, kind of runs the SOC more or less. If he's in charge, I'm taking directions from him. We also tag in our account management. That's typically who's going to own the conversation with the client and be able to take what we're doing and going to and putting in a non-technical speak for the business owners or whoever we're communicating with in that particular incident. Typically, as part of the CSIRT team, we also like to tap in a network engineer on our team. There's always a fair amount of correlation with cybersecurity and having a good foundation in network fundamentals at the very least. If you can understand how a network works, then you're better off when it comes to figuring out how to protect and also, comb through a network. So,
Yeah, one of the roles we just kind of went back through this again because we're working on CMMC is we have one called a records manager. So this is basically someone, not the leader, not the, basically is keeping track and documenting the incident, the post, once it's resolved, doing the after action documentation, which at first I'm like, well, that sounds excessive. but but then I was thinking about it, it's like this person is probably they're not running everything, so they're not going to have the assumptions. They're going to be very detailed on the documentation because they're not like the one doing everything. So they're going to be asking questions and making sure everything's checked on and we have our incident record fully documented. Um, and they also, you know, they're not the ones if something went bad that's like trying to cover their butt or something. Um, so after first saying, well, that sounds excessive, I was like, well, it makes a little bit of sense. So you
one of
just
the
kind of pick that person and that's all they have to really worry about.
yeah, one of the ones that's often missed too is depending on the severity of it. Do you have legal counsel involved? Is the cybersecurity insurance involved? These are all things that need to be defined. Daniel brought it up earlier. Is if a client has cybersecurity insurance, how you respond may be different. Is that captured in your IRP or your incident response plan? Um, Sometimes if it's a major issue, I probably have legal involved, whether it's in-house or somebody that you keep on retainer or something along those lines. So
Yeah, actually, it's funny you say that. We were brought in on an incident recently where there was like a malicious employee or a set of malicious employees that recently had exited a company. And we had a relationship with their legal, and their legal referred us to bring us on because it was such a bad situation that they needed to even figure out, what was going on. And a lot of times legal can get involved a lot earlier in the process than you might think, just depending on what the dynamics are.
we had one. There was a man in the middle attack for a client, and you know we noticed it and we're like, okay, this looks like it's actually legit. So we ended up, contacting the insurance. They ended up handing it off to, a multi-billion-dollar cybersecurity company to work hand in hand with us, which was kind of a cool experience. But they're going to the insurance companies are going to kind of dictate how it should go. And sometimes you may have to partner with somebody. Um, or you may have to hand the case over to an entirely independent third party and just kind of sit back and let them do their own analysis and investigation. So it's just there's a lot of different flavors that you kind of have to prepare for.
Yeah, and I mean, so it, typically once you know there's an incident, again, unless it's probably something simple like somebody gave their password up and you got it reset in 10 minutes or something. But cyber insurance is you're going to want to have it into your incident response plan and know exactly when to call them because if you jump on trying to fix things before you talk to them, you can invalidate your claim. You can basically make things worse. And then they're typically going to bring in lawyers and get you under attorney-client privilege, like right from the jump,
Yep.
so that then you can, you know, work the incident. You kind of just want to let them drive. I know for us, we direct our clients like, number one, if you don't have cyber insurance, get cyber insurance. And number two, let's make sure that we understand how this is going to work with the cyber insurance provider because yeah, when again, it's kind of the same thing. When it's going down, you don't want to be sitting there scrambling like, what's our cyber insurance company again? How do we get a hold of them? And you're contacting your broker who has no clue what you know, any of that stuff. So um, pretty critical to have that stuff in. And again, we just went through this. So like we did the same thing. Like, what is our contact information for the cyber insurance? And we thought it was our broker. And we were like, oh, so we got that updated. We're good now on our right hand side.
I'm gonna jump in with my terrible analogy. Since I was talking about weather and we're talking about insurance companies, it's just like a roof claim. You get hit with some hail, don't go fix your roof first, then turn in the claim. Gonna have a little bit of a challenge getting the cash out of the insurance company that way too. So
What
get in the
one?
plan.
Yep, one thing too, and Jason kind of touched on it a little bit. As you're going through and taking a look, is this a true incident? Make sure that you're keeping track of, journaling it or noting it down. What are you doing? What is your collection analysis? Like what steps are you taking during that? Because insurance gets involved, you're going to have to turn that information over. Like what all have you touched? What is your fingerprints on versus, the threat actor?
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess again, maybe stepping back a couple slides with the planning of like understanding your logging. You just kind of triggered something in my head thinking about logging because we had a client with one of the remote home users launched a Zoom remote assist, which appears as legit software. And somebody was on their computer, and I don't know how long it was. I don't think it was super long that they were on their computer before they called the IT team, and then we kind of got involved in. Um, but trying to get logging for that was like crazy difficult. Like Zoho wasn't really playing super nice, and there wasn't a lot of logs on the machine about it. So like understanding how are we capturing logs, I guess it's more for the IT side of like how we're capturing all these logs so that we can actually correlate the data and figure out what actually happened. Also probably a good planning step.
Yeah, and most cyber insurance policies these days are written so that like you really don't even qualify unless you have these things in place. You need to have logging, you need to have protections, you need to have an incident response plan. So if you're thinking about investing in cyber insurance, you should start working on that incident response plan now because I would say at least 99 out of 100 insurance companies won't approve, a policy until that's in place. So
Yeah, yeah,
And you can go get templates from, NIST or MITRE framework will, there's tons of different places you can get some bare bones basic templates to get you started.
but you could also call us because we're experts.
I was gonna say,
yeah,
send me a LinkedIn. I'll DM you a template.
It's the same here.
yeah. All right, we're ready to move on to share my screen here again. I'm not sure if this is working better or not.
What are we talking about again?
All right. The NIST incident response framework. Um, so this basically framework for incident response is prepare, detect, contain, and recover. I think we actually in our incident response plan we have a couple extra, like we have triaging, um, and then we have after action items. Are you following this IR framework or
Sometimes, I mean, I also like the PISRL model: preparation, identification, containment, eradication, recovery, lessons/opportunities for improvement. So it kind of just adds a little bit extra to the NIST framework of, identify, protect, detect, respond, recover.
Yeah, we're kind of doing something similar. We kind of have NIST at the base of what we're doing, but we're kind of built on that.
yeah, I'm just
I think we
scrolling
were
through it.
talking a little bit on the preparation side, pretty heavily earlier, but then Jason, you were talking about some logging, as part of that NIST framework with the detection component, knowing what to watch and what should be an alert and what shouldn't be an alert. That's really where a good partner can come into for somebody is, there's a bunch of stuff that's malicious and there's a bunch of stuff that's false positive too. So knowing how to react to the proper stuff too. So then what containment needs to look like. And then, that stealing from some friends out there, but some blameless autopsy at the end of it too. So that post-incident review and strengthen, um, that's definitely a key piece of that framework.
I always look at it as, played a lot of sports growing up, football, wrestled all the time, but particularly in football, whether you won the game or lost the game, your coach usually sits you down and goes after action. what worked well, what didn't work well, and where we can improve. Um, and then you carry that in, carry that with you into practice, the coming weeks. It's no different. What worked, what didn't work, where can we improve? Is there something that didn't work well, but we just flat out have to accept it because of limitations of X, Y, or Z? Um, these are all questions you should be asking.
Yeah, when we have those conversations in hindsight, in the times where we have had a major event with a client, it's always, usually one of two conversations of A, we didn't prepare the right controls. We had suggested controls. We opted not to implement those controls. Now we need to implement those controls, and it's usually a pretty, cooperative conversation. The other scenario is the security awareness training, right? It is we had all the controls in place, but somebody still did stuff they're not supposed to do, which means we're not spending enough time getting the employees aligned with the strategy and the behaviors that they need to be doing. And so, really, I would say 100% of the time it's one of those two things. And then that, how do we get people to buy into these things? The tools is one thing. Obviously, it's the budget's a component of that. But when it comes to the security awareness training, how do you get your staff engaged? How do you get them to follow process and protocols? And that becomes more of a collaborative conversation. And, a lot of times, where they weren't prioritizing it before, it's a lot more productive conversation, when they've lost money or time because of it. So.
And then also if you've had, things on the back burner, if you bring forward a recommendation for a control and a client doesn't want it, always get it documented. Denial of recommendation forms are your friend. It's like, hey, we really should have, MFA. Oh no, we don't want to do that. We don't want to do that. Okay, could you please sign here saying that, we've recommended this, you're denying it. Then you can come in after the fact, and it's not like you don't rub their face in it by any means. But you can be like, hey, this is why we recommended this. Would you like to have a conversation about this now? Um, it's typically why companies after a huge breach, they're some of the most secure places, in general, is because they'll then be willing to listen to those recommendations.
Yeah. Yeah, no, also kind of one of the things you need to think about as far as the framework, and I guess again ours has like some more steps, but understanding when to recover, because if you don't eradicate the thing before you start recovering, um, yeah, you could be in bad shape because people have restored. You go through all this work of restoring your backups, which you did a good job. You had your backups, but then you go restore backups that were already infected, and now you're starting all over. Um, hopefully that gets identified quickly. Restore it and find out that they're in your network for a long period of time or something.
Really, that kind of goes back to the whole identify stage. What's the splash damage on this? What kind of blast radius are we looking at here? Is it one? Is it an individual? Is it a department? Is it the whole company? Um, has it leaked out into other companies? Do you need to alert, other entities that this has happened? So,
Yeah, especially if you're in a regulated industry, you got to have all those governing bodies that you need to report to in your plan, ready to notify them. Because a lot of them, like I know, like CMMC, you have 72 hours that you have to report to them, um, and then they're they came out with the new CUI rule that it was actually 24 hours, which is kind of weird because CMMC is basically protecting CUI. So you had these like conflicting. Um, so again, understanding all that and having that in your plan as well. Like, hey, I got to report to DoD within 72 hours, or now you could potentially have a False Claims Act on your hand or something else. I'm not sure exactly what it is for HIPAA, but I'm sure they have something as well. And
I want to say HIPAA 72 hours.
yeah,
Even if you're not in a highly regulated industry, the amount of damage it could do to your business, it can become, not 100% something that's easy to calculate because, for example, we've taken on clients that were in an incident previously and coming to us, after knowing that they were compromised. And while taking that client on in the conversations about them becoming a client and the emails about payment, our finance department started getting targeted by the people that were in their emails. And so, like, that's something you carry with you. Like, if you have that thing going on in your business into new business transactions and then other people you're trying to do business with, potential clients, potential vendors, you're putting them at risk, and that's, something that you really don't, want to carry with your company. It's not just, what was the damage on the breach or things like that, but it's like it can inhibit you to do business successfully going forward and create, potentially hostile relationships in that way. So I think, it's not just about the plan. Uh, that last piece, really, it's kind of the reverse part of the plan, which is like making sure that, at the end of everything, you have fully recovered, you have fully identified every piece of it and dealt with it. And I think that that's almost understated as well, as far as, we know what to do if something happens, but have we really addressed everything completely? That's something where, again, with smaller companies or less, mature, organizations, you do see that there's just a little bit of a lack of follow-up, and then that could kind of cascade into future problems as well.
One correction on my end. So under the current security rules for HIPAA, you have to notify OCR or Office of Civil Rights within 60 days. However, the proposed new rules that should be taking effect, I think it's next month, it will be within 24 hours.
Yeah, 24 hours goes fast when you're trying to figure out what the heck's going on.
It really does.
Agreed.
All right, let me share my screen here. I think we got wrong one. I'm not doing too good with this screen sharing today.
Struggle busting
Not
over there.
overcome. We got this.
We believe in you, man.
All right, practice makes perfect. That's what we're talking about here.
Practice, 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 practice.
Yep. All right, so making IR plans stick. Obviously, I think we got into this quite a bit already, but again, how do you turn that into just some exercise that you had to go through to check box that you have an instant response plan to something that's actually, effective when something does it. I'm sure you guys say it all the time. It's not a matter of if, it's when. So making sure that you have something when it does happen.
Well, first of all, making something stick, obviously simplifying it down, right? I mean, if it's 100, 200, 300 pages, it's going to be tough to make that stick. So I think starting first of all is just prioritizing some critical business systems, right? Where's the crown jewels? What do we have to do around the crown jewels? Is it, your finance data or your intellectual property, or maybe, I don't know, your end user data or your client data? And then, once you've got that figured out, then it's the creation of tiers in order to understand how to respond to those things too, right? Like you guys were just saying, some stuff is within 24 hours. Some stuff is just so low on the totem pole that you can prioritize it within your weekly tasks. So not everything's DEFCON 1, but some stuff really, really is. And then when you hit DEFCON 1, I think you were saying it, Jason, too, is practice, 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 right? I've done over my years, I don't even like to think about how many years it's been, but a lot of years of being in IT, enterprise IT too, making the rubber meet the road with the plan and going somewhere and putting it through its paces and really, really figuring out where the gaps and how you thought it was going to go versus how it actually went. Helps to keep that muscle memory going, and helps to make things stick, be fresh in people's heads. Be prepared for when it does happen, right? We know don't do this because this is what happens. So I think you focus on those three things, man, you can really make something stick and gain traction.
Yeah, I mean, understanding the risk. What's the business risk? What's the exposure? But one of the first things, if you really want to get, an incident response plan to stick, is you have to have buy-in from the client first and foremost. If they don't believe in it, it's not going to matter what you have on a piece of paper. They don't see the value in it and understanding what the reality could look like. They're not going to care. And then they won't be willing to participate in, practice runs, stuff like that. Thankfully, there's a lot of regulatory requirements these days that actually put these to the forefront. But then it comes back to, if you're not practicing when it comes time crunch time, it's just a piece of paper at the end of the day if you don't understand the document itself and what you're doing. And Tony brought up a key point. If it's 300 pages long, that's probably not going to do you any good either. It needs to be clear, concise, to the point.
Yeah, I'm always a big fan of gamification and incentives. I think anything you want to do in any organization or across organizations, you have to give people a real reason to be excited about it or comply. So, that could look a lot of different ways. Like if you are trying to implement it with your internal team, just kind of setting goals and then putting incentives around those goals. Or, what I think it would be really cool, and I'm trying to work towards doing this with our clients, is like doing an annual event where we're going to do a tabletop exercise. We're going to maybe eat lunch and play games, and people could win prizes and stuff like that. Because those sort of things tend to stick with people in their memory. Like, it's just a positive association. And then when that email comes in and they're thinking, could this be bad? Could this not be bad? They're going to think about it a little harder and a little longer before they make the wrong move, because you've imprinted, the right way with that stuff. And I think if you can do that in any small way in your organization, it's a really good way to get people to take it seriously.
Yeah. I mean, I'll reiterate the executive buy-in, because if you don't have the executive buy-in, doesn't matter what you do with these plans. You got to get them in, you got to get them concerned. Which I guess a tip, but CISA has some really good tabletop playbooks to run through. I think I don't know how often they update them, but like pretty solid, because that's also, if you just go in and you're like, oh, we got ransomware, what do we do? Like, you want you want to kind of set the story up a little bit, probably get people more engaged. Um, I know at one point, I think Ryan, you guys know Ryan, right? I think Ryan, one of our clients, was going around just like post a note on somebody's computer. This computer has ransomware, like, and just walk away. Like, see how they react. Not everybody was in on it that was supposed to be in on it, but maybe not that user. But that's
That's
kind of a
fantastic.
yeah, yeah, probably another good way to like really test. It's kind of like sending out phishing simulations, right? To see if people fall for them. But like, what do people do if they, because they're going to turn on their computer, they might have something on their screen that says your computer's encrypted. What do they do? Post a note's a little safer way to try that.
One of the things I want to do internally here, a couple of my buddies do this, but they do, red team, blue team, capture the flag, and blue team has to use the IRP for the organization. So you get different attack vectors, stuff like that. Is your incident response plan capable of taking on more than one type of attack?
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, and that's where I think partnering with a firm is also valuable. Is, your plan is only as good as it actually is in the real world. I mean, going through it on paper on a tabletop exercise is not always like 100% efficient. Being able to say, hey, do you have somebody who can do security research within your infrastructure, and then apply controls and then test controls? That's, a really big investment to make, but a very smart investment to make.
Speaking of working with the firm, so next slide. How do MSPs help you get there? You guys know?
Just continue to plant some seeds. So obviously, even a really good incident response plan is only as good as the team that you have behind it too. So I think that's obviously a known risk. With small businesses, is just having the correct team. You just can't in-house that. It's just too costly to in-house that. So investing in a good partner out there, good MSP, will help be that great team behind a great plan. And so second seed is with that great plan, talking earlier, first step is getting started with it, right? Just getting something, whether you're hitting one of us for a template to try and mess around with, is a great start, but a great MSP partner will come in and help elaborate on those points, help break out some of the other decisions that might not necessarily come to light in in a template, and then walk you through that. So super critical to get the right people at the table, starting, otherwise you just can spin your wheels and lose, I hate to use the word traction again, but lose traction on it.
One of the things too, is say, partnering with an MSP, would you rather it be your phone that's ringing, as a business owner, from your, security vendor, or would you rather it be my phone that's ringing and hopping in and jumping into it, whether it's 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning? Um, it's to help provide kind of some peace of mind as well and getting this stuff built out. So, it's the trusted advisor role is when your business succeeds and grows, it helps our business succeed and grow. So we want to ensure that.
Yeah, it's the most cost effective way to do it. And just like Josh is saying, like I can do bookkeeping. It's not the best use of my time in my business to grow it. There's somebody who's better suited for that. And it's more cost effective and a better use of my time and money. So I'm going to go with the expert.
Yeah, and I think an MSP hopefully is kind of approaching this from a holistic standpoint, and we talked about the CSF. They're instant response plan is just one piece of the puzzle. Hopefully, they're bringing the rest of the pieces for you and putting the whole thing together. So I think that's where MSPs, we're living in this world every day. We're dealing with it for many companies versus just an internal IT guy who's just got the one company to worry about, who's only seen what he's seen at that one place, versus an MSP that's, we talked about some examples of things that have happened at clients or prospects, and we see that stuff all the time. So it's a lot more, it's like, yeah, the experience is already there. It's already baked in versus
That
just again.
that and we'll pick up on the patterns faster too, because we have, because we are representing multiple companies. And so we might see a trend a lot quicker and be able to develop a plan to deal with it because, hey, I've already had to deal with it over here. So now I can cover the rest of my bases.
Cool. I think we're up against the wire here. Let me share out our LinkedIn. Again, if anybody needs an incident response plan, hopefully I'm sharing out the right window. Um,
Tony, you really got to update that photo, man.
Oh man, that was more of a laugh. And I've been getting so much crap about that lately, and it has not made the priority list.
yeah.
Get one of them AI headshot deals. That's what
I tried that too. It didn't turn out so well, so we've stuck with the
Wow.
old one so far.
Hey, when it's working for you, man, you don't quit it.
Hey, it's
That's
one of
true.
those crazy grenades and last minute thoughts too that I had at the wrong moment, which I should have interjected it earlier too. So part of that incident response plan is AI. I think some people got to be thinking about AI training your employees using AI to better something and then accidentally leaking things out in the wild too. So don't forget to have that in your incident response.
That should be a whole webinar.
I know. I'm running now.
I'll kick you guys over article I came across and see if you guys maybe want to touch on something like that for a future webinar.
Yeah, definitely.
Man.
Yeah. All right. Well, we should probably wrap this webinar up. So again, everybody, we thank you for attending. Again, you guys can hit us up on LinkedIn if you need an incident response plan. I think all four of us have one, so we can help you out. But yeah, join us next month. Should probably be the last Thursday of the month again. Yeah, we'll send out invites to everybody and see you next month. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
All right.